federal judge in Philadelphia is dismantling Donald Trump's Ministry of Truth, his Orwellian attempt to rewrite history, to erase slavery and the stain of slavery from our public consciousness, to literally rip down with bare hands plaques on the president's house in Independence Hall Memorial in Philadelphia commemorating the 9 slaves owned by George Washington because Donald Trump finds it distasteful. And Judge Roof is showing what federal judges in year 2 of this administration, now robust, now with courage, now willing to take on the Trump administration in a way they weren't to a year ago, what they're doing about it. They're quoting George Orwell. They're telling the world that Donald Trump is not able to erase facts and history that are meaningful to the American people, or otherwise, as Donald Trump is busy trying to put back up Confederate generals as statues and put their names back on military bases. The fact that I'm going to show the clip in a minute. The fact that he sent a couple of National Park Service lackeys to go with their bare hands and rip down these plaques from the president's house, which commemorates the location where President Adams and President Washington resided, in the cradle of our democracy, Philadelphia, where I've been since I was a child, which I frequent, and I've been to Independence Hall, the reproduction of where the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were signed, to the Liberty Bell exhibit, which is next to this president's house, to the Betsy Ross Memorial about the person who allegedly, mythically created the flag. Donald Trump has no respect for anything that has to do with our history. He allowed the Capitol, another cradle of our democracy, to be attacked and burned for the first time since the War of 1812. And Judge Roof, senior status judge, Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and people like Governor Josh Shapiro are putting a stop to it. I'm Michael Popok. You're on Midas Touch and Legal AF. I'm fired up. I'm glad we have judges like Judge Roof, and I'm glad the senior status judges are leading the way once again, citing too frequently George Orwell. Now, this all comes down to a set of plaques. I'm going to show you a video of it being torn down in a new memorial called President's House, which Philadelphia and Pennsylvania found through historical research, which is the place where Adams and Washington lived. And this was a memorial to the 9, I'm going to read their names in a minute, the 9 enslaved people who were enslaved to do jobs for George Washington. That's the right way to put it. And Donald Trump wants to change that. So 3 weeks ago, he sent a couple of guys in to rip the signs down. Now, this is a joint collaboration of the federal government, the Interior Department, the Park Service, and Philadelphia and Pennsylvania to operate this site. But they can't deface it. They can't rewrite it. They can't put their Trumpian graffiti on it. Here's a clip of these guys ripping down the signs.
Developing right here and right now tonight on Independence Mall, a piece of Philadelphia history was removed this afternoon by the federal government. Crews dismantled plaques telling the stories of the 9 enslaved people who lived in the president's house and were owned by President George Washington. Last year, President Trump ordered National Park staff to flag any displays that might be seen as disparaging to America's past. Philadelphia Mayor Sherelle Parker says the city is conducting a legal review of this tonight. An attorney who advocated for those plaques in 2010 called the removal, quote, outrageous and blatantly racist.
Here's how the Judge Roof, in granting a preliminary injunction against the Interior Department, forcing them to restore the site the way it was. Here's what she says to lead off on page 1, her order today. All history was a palimpsest, scraped clean and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary. In no case would it have been possible, once the deed was done, to prove that any falsification had taken place. George Orwell, 1984. The judge kicks off her order this way. As if the Ministry of Truth in George Orwell's 1984 now existed, with its motto, ignorance is strength, this court is now asked to determine whether the federal government has the power it claims to dissemble and disassemble historical truths when it has some domain over historical facts. It does not. The president's house is a component of the Independence Historical Park that commemorates the site of the first official presidential residence and the people who lived there. These are the first presidents, including people enslaved by President George Washington. On January 22nd of 2026, the National Park Service removed those panels, as you saw, and displays and video exhibits referencing slavery. The judge goes on page 31 of her order, to talk about these enslaved people and how Donald Trump can't whitewash history away, not on her watch. She says on page 31, quoting from a research book and an amicus brief, the people who President Washington held in slavery, which the commemoration of him on those panels include Oni Judge, who was held in slavery as a maid, Austin, Oni's brother, Christopher Shields, held in slavery as Washington's butler, body servant, Giles as a carriage driver, Hercules Posey held in slavery as a chef, Joe Richardson held in slavery as a coachman, Moll as a nanny, Paris as a stable worker, Richmond, the son of Hercules, held in slavery as a chimney sweep. She then quotes George Orwell again about the attempted rewrite. And listen to what she calls Donald Trump in this section. She says the largest section, quoting Big Brother's domain in 1984, the largest section of the government's records department consists simply of persons whose duty it was to track down and collect all copies of books, newspapers, and other documents which had been superseded and were due for destruction. In other words, recalling and rewriting again and again without admitting any alteration or admitting any forgery about what had just been rewritten. The government here, the judge says, asserts truth is no longer self-evident, but rather the property of the elected chief magistrate and the appointees and delegates. That's you, Trump.